Twilight Gets a Puppy. By TDR. Chapter 69. Over a Basset. Part 2. Ross frowned looking out the window of the caboose. Trains were not supposed to go backwards. Even more so, this one was going backwards down a set of rails that was far too old and ill-maintained to be part of the main line. He was also certain that it had been ponies pulling the train, not Buffalo pushing it when he had gone to sleep. That really only meant one thing, that this had been a literal train robbery. The pun amused him slightly, though he needed to figure out how to get out of this. He doubted the thieves knew he was here, and he didn't like the idea of trying to fight his way past this many buffalo. What to do, what to do? Ah! Pulling on his new coat, Ross adjusted the white, 10-gallon hat he wore until it was just over his eyes. He plucked a twig from the tree to put in his mouth like an old cigar and hiked his belt up further. He shoved a couple of apples into his pockets before pulling the long coat over them to make it look like he was packing a pair of big irons or something. A small grin crossed his face, which he quickly squashed down, fixing instead a 1,000-yard stare and an annoyed grimace on his face. He could very well bluff his way out of this by playing the part of the stallion without a name. The buffalo likely hadn't seen any plays like that, and even if they had read the book it was based on, they might very well just add to the legend and make his getting out of there easier. Ross felt the caboose start to slow. Clearly they were where they were going. He allowed himself a last small smirk at the plan before showtime. He rather enjoyed westerns. Asterisk. Apelioaza. Mf. Braben exclaimed from around, the magical energy wrapped tightly around his muzzle. Okay, listen here, butt brain. Twilight growled. Braben. Applejack corrected. Don't care. Twilight responded without looking at her friend. I'm sure you have a job to do when someone shows up here, but my brother was dog-napped by buffalo and I have neither the time nor patience to put up with any delays to his recovery. Now I'm going to release your mouth and you are going to tell me where the sheriff is. Then you are going to get out of my way, or so help me I will teleport you back to whatever landscape I was looking at outside my window before I went to bed. And since I don't remember it that well, you might wind up in the frozen north, or embedded in a rock wall instead, understand? Braben nodded quickly. Good. Twilight snapped, letting the magic fade from the stallion's muzzle. Sheriff, now. Asterisk. There's someone in there. Little Strongheart frowned from her perch atop the caboose. The gathered buffalo muttered to themselves as they clustered around the train car. Some of them were a little upset that they had accidentally fool-napped someone, though others seemed to be of the opinion that the more settlers they drove off the better. None of them were prepared for the door of the train car to be kicked open with a crash and a large figure to practically unfold itself from out of the small train door. Clawed rear paws of navy blue kicked up small puffs of dust as they landed on the dry ground under the door of the caboose. A breeze blew by, making the dark green and gold-trimmed duster the figure wore billow and flap against the figure's legs. A dark furred tail flicked and whipped behind the creature, a small glowing point of light barely visible as it moved through the shadow cast by the train car. Long arms ending in clawed fingers rested at his side. His hands twitched as it seemed ready to draw something out from under his coat the moment there was any trouble from the buffalo around him. A large white hat rested low on his head, slits for his long ears allowing them to poke out of the side of the hat. The shadow cast over his face by the hat hid his eyes save for a soft glint of amber as his gaze shifted. Sharp teeth gnawed on the end of a stick it had in his mouth. His head turned slowly, taking in the herd as if carefully assessing how much a threat they were. All eyes were locked on the imposing figure, and when he took another step forward some of the herd flinched. Somewhere in the distance an odd whistling sound could be heard. Asterisk. Pinkie Pie, stop that! Rainbow Dash hissed. The pair of them were situated behind a large rock, having caught up with the train robbers. But he's doing the hero, the evil, and the hideous thing, I can't not do the whistle. Pinkie Pie protested. You're gonna get us caught and then we can't save him. Dash growled. You mean like your growling just did? Pinkie Pie asked, pointing at the buffalo that now surrounded them. Bucket. Cursed. Asterisk. Apelioaza. So basically what you're saying is the buffalo are demanding you cut down all the trees and leave. Applejack frowned. That's about the size of it. This is probably the worst thing they've done so far, attacking the train. The sheriff muttered. We've had some supplies taken and some property vandalized, but it's been pretty small scale so far. Robbing a train and foal napping is a new low for Princess Celestia herself approved the building of Appaloosa out here about 20 years ago. We finally got everything working right and our orchard grown, and now they wanna run us out? It ain't happening. Brayburn added. We've not heard from Rainbow Dash or Pinkie Pie. I expect they both went after Ross. Rarity explained. Not the pair I would send first into a rescue operation, I assure you. Oh, I'm sure they will all be fine. Fluttershy placated. Right. Twilight had been silent for a while, reading over the documentation the sheriff had shown her about the right for the town to be here. Right, Twilight. Applejack said louder. Yes, right. Everything seems to be in order with this. Twilight stated, giving the paper back to the sheriff. I'm not sure what the story is here with the buffalo, but they live in Equestria and can't go against the princess's ruling like this, so they are the criminals in this case. Right. The sheriff agreed. That said, I would still like to hear their side of the story. Twilight continued, her mane and tail starting to smolder, causing every pony to take a step away from her as her tone darkened considerably. However, if they have hurt my brother, then no one is going to need to worry about buffalo in these parts ever again. Oh dear. Fluttershy whimpered. Asterisk. Ross raised an eyebrow under his hat as Dash and Pinkie Pie were escorted over to where he was. Dash looked ready to fight her way out of there. Pinkie looked. Hi Ross. Did you like the epic western score? My granny taught me how to whistle like that. At first I was all like dun na, then woo woo woo, only with whistling. I forgot my maracas, but I shook this cactus and it sounded just like that, Pinkie rambled. Pinkie looked like she always did. You! Rainbow Dash shouted, pointing up above Ross's head. Ross' ears twitched as he heard hooves scuffing on the top of the train car, but if he looked up he'd have to remove his hat to see up too far, and that would show off the poofed mess of his hair, so that wasn't happening. He remained where he was, hoping to look cool and unconcerned. Crap! Look, we didn't mean to hurt anyone on the train, and you sorta hit the sign on your own, so you can't blame me for that. Little Strongheart protested. You foal napped! Dash yelled. Dog napped. Pinkie corrected. Whatever, you dog napped a friend of ours. How's that not meaning any harm? Dash continued. We didn't know anyone was in the caboose, we only wanted the tree. Strongheart protested. The settlers have overtaken the land, far more than they had to start, and planted an orchard all over our traditional stampeding grounds. What? Dash questioned. We have a long and wide stampeding trail that we have run upon for generations. We used to move along to our next camp for the changing of the seasons. A deep voice echoed from behind them. The rest of the buffalo suddenly hushed and Strongheart looked worried. A massive buffalo with a feathered headdress approached, flanked by warriors just as large as he was. I am Chief Thunderhooves, this is my granddaughter, Little Strongheart. The buffalo stated. The settlers have overstepped their bounds and set hoof into lands granted to my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great. Chief Thunderhooves continued. Grandpa. It's only 8 back. Strongheart stated. How many did I just do? The chief questioned. 12? Pinkie Pie helpfully offered. Got carried away. At any rate, my 8 times great-grandfather Chief 3 Bear was granted this land by Ko Komiki-sama for his service as her protector. It rightfully belongs to the buffalo. We did not mind when the settlers first showed up, nor did we mind the train, as this land is wide and such transport is useful, plus they were not in the way of our migration and we could trade for what we might want. When they started planting their orchard across our sacred path is when things turned sour. We attempted to speak with them about their expansion, but they refused to move what they had already planted. Chief Thunderhooves continued. As such, some of my tribe have decided to take driving them out into their own hooves. Little Strongheart at least tried to look ashamed at that point. Woof. Ross said simply, still maintaining his stern gunslinger stance. What? Chief Thunderhooves asked, looking to the Moondog for the first time curiously. He asked why you haven't gone to the princesses yet. This is the sort of dispute that they regularly deal with. Pinkie Pie translated. Because they claim Princess Celestia is the one who gave them these lands. And with no one but the word of our ancestors being given the land from Ko Komiki-sama, we do not have any sort of case for it. Chief Thunderhooves sighed. I didn't know Princess Celestia just gives out land like that, something seems fishy. Pinkie frowned. You keep saying that word, but what does it mean? Rainbow Dash questioned. It is the name of the moon goddess who granted us the land, Chief Thunderhooves stated, blinking as Pinkie Pie smiled and Dash face hooved. What? Bark. Ross smirked, showing his fangs, something that made a few more buffalo flinch again. What? The chief asked. Yeah, you're right, that does sound like Princess Luna. Pinkie Pie pondered. Yeah, you are probably in luck, Chief. Whatever name you said sounds like Princess Luna, and she just got back from a unwanted vacation, so she'll probably be able to tell her sister that the land was yours first. Rainbow Dash offered. None of them will be really happy with what's been going on, but this should be settled fairly quickly. The chief was going to respond when a stray cloud lazily drifted across the sun, casting the land in a brief shadow. While there were a number of clouds in the sky, this was the first one to manage to darken the land by any significant amount. This was also the first time Chief Thunderhooves had been looking at Ross when there was enough shadow for him to notice the points of light at the end of his tail and ears as they poked out of the top of his hat. The dark-furred buffalo paled considerably, his eyes widening as big as plates as he stared at the Moondog. Sick imitat! The chief uttered. The response was immediate. Every buffalo who heard the chief took off running in a massive stampede away from the caboose and the creature standing before it. The only exceptions to this were a few of the younger buffalo and Little Strongheart. The two ponies and the Moondog looked around curiously, wondering what was going on. What the frick was that? Rainbow Dash demanded. Yeah, what did he say? What's sick imita mean? Pinkie Pie asked. Strongheart blinked, looking over at Ross, her ears flattening to her head as she stared at the confused Moondog, moving to keep the two ponies between her and Ross. Sick imitat means black dog. They are seen as omens of death. Little Strongheart swallowed. Ross isn't black, silly, he's more of a navy blue color. Pinkie Pie pointed out. Asterisk. Twilight checked her bag and then the map she was given to the buffalo camp one last time before trotting out into the waste, Applejack, Fluttershy, and Rarity following close behind her. Darling, do you really think this is necessary? Rarity asked. You don't have to come. Twilight stated. Yes, we went over this before, back during the Nightmare Moon fiasco. Rarity rolled her eyes. I am not letting you go alone. But I simply think you may be overreacting a bit in storming off to the camp for a rescue. Ross should be fine, Fluttershy added her 2 cents in. Really, what would you do if your brother was kidnapped by a known hostile force? Twilight asked, continuing to march into the desert. I wouldn't know, I do not have a brother. Rarity sighed. Hope they only returned an ear and we never saw the rest again. Fluttershy said softly. Every pony stopped to look back at Fluttershy with a bit of worry. Fluttershy, however, didn't notice as she was helping a beetle climb a nearby cactus to get to a flower at the top. Oh okay, Applejack. Twilight continued. Head out to help him, afore he did something stupid. Applejack stated flatly. Right. I am quite sure Ross will be fine on his own, but given the situation he might still need help. Twilight agreed. It should be noted I'm quite glad Spike didn't come, it would have been far worse had he been the one to get nabbed. Seriously? Rarity rolled her eyes. Yep. Applejack added. Think about what you'd do if Sweetie Belle was full napped. Rarity pondered a moment as they trotted before finally nodding. I suppose I would see if the Griffin Empire was still on that hamburger fad they had for a while. Rarity finally offered. They're not, I considered that though. Twilight commented. Ain't hamburger a fancy name for cows? Applejack questioned. It is. Fluttershy stated. For a specific way of cooking cow flesh to be exact. Yeah well, now I'm glad I didn't eat anything before we left. Applejack muttered, turning green at the thought. Author's note. For those wondering, I used a Blackfoot Indian language translation for the names the buffalo called Ross and Luna. We also see that Twilight has a bit of an aggressive streak when it comes to her family as well. It was one reason why Spike was left behind, because being the calm one of the two he'd pretty much keep the story canon, and that would be dull. This is what Pinkie Pie was whistling if you didn't catch on. Done Nanana. End author's note. End chapter 69. Over a Basset. Part 2.